He was running, not from a stranger, not from an enemy. He was running from someone who was supposed to love him, someone who sat at the family dinner table, who called him by his nickname, who knew exactly what he was afraid of. And on a cold Tuesday night in October, Kelvin Marsh got into his car, pulled out of a driveway he had called home for most of his life, and drove into the dark. He never came back. And when investigators started asking questions, when they started peeling back the layers of what actually happened in that house, what they found didn't just break people's hearts, it shook them. Because this story isn't just about a car crash on a quiet stretch of highway. It's about what drove him there, and what nobody was willing to say out loud until it was far too late.
Before we continue, I want to know where you're watching from right now. Drop your country in the comments below. We have viewers joining from all over the world, and it means everything to know you're here. And if you care about stories that bring real awareness to the kind of abuse that hides behind closed doors and family smiles, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because these stories is more common than most people think, and the more we talk about it, the harder it becomes for it to stay hidden.
On the surface, what happened to Kelvin Marsh looked like a tragic accident. A young man, alone in the dark, driving too fast on a road he probably knew by heart. The official report said it was a single vehicle crash, no other cars involved, no witnesses. Just a stretch of blacktop outside of a small town in rural Georgia, a guardrail, and a 20-year-old who didn't make it to the morning. But here's what that report didn't say. It didn't say that in the weeks before that night, Kelvin had stopped sleeping, that he'd started flinching at the sound of certain voices, that he had confided in at least one person, that he felt like he was trapped, like no matter what direction he turned, there was no way out.
And it didn't say a single word about Tasha Garland. It didn't say who she was to him, what she had done, or what secret she was carrying when Kelvin's car left that road. At first, it looked like a tragic accident, but the truth behind Kelvin's final days tells a completely different story. Kelvin Marsh was born on a warm April morning in 1999 in a small town just outside of Macon, Georgia. He was the middle child, sandwiched between an older brother named Darnell, who had already moved up to Atlanta to start a career in construction, and a younger sister named Brianna, who was 15 at the time of Kelvin's death and who idolized him in the way only little sisters can. Their mother, Loretta Marsh, was a practical woman, a hard woman in the way that life had made her. She worked double shifts at a distribution warehouse most weeks, which meant the house ran on routine and self-reliance.
Their father had been out of the picture since Kelvin was 12. He didn't talk about it much. He just adjusted, the way kids do, quietly absorbing the absence and moving on. By the time Kelvin turned 20, he was the kind of young man people liked immediately. He had an easy laugh, the kind that came up fast and genuine, like it surprised even him. He worked part-time at a local auto parts store, took a couple of community college classes in the evenings, and spent most of his free time tinkering with a 2003 Chevy pickup he was slowly trying to restore in the driveway. His co-worker and close friend, a man named Trey Holloway, later told people that Kelvin was the most patient person he had ever met. He could spend 4 hours trying to fix one thing on that truck, Trey said, and he'd never once lose his temper. He just kept at it. Kelvin wasn't perfect.
He struggled with direction, something he openly admitted to. He wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. He second-guessed himself often. He had a habit of taking on other people's problems before his own. But he was trying. He was genuinely, quietly trying. And the people who knew him best saw that. He had a soft spot for his grandmother's cooking, specifically her sweet potato pie, which she made every Thanksgiving and which Kelvin would eat 3 slices of before anyone else had finished at first. He loved old R&B music, the kind his mother played on Sunday mornings while she cleaned the house. He had a journal he kept under his mattress that nobody knew about until after he was gone. These were the details that made Kelvin Marsh real. Not a case number, not a headline, a person, a young man who was still figuring out who he was and who deserved every chance in the world to find out.
Tasha Garland was 34 years old at the time of Kelvin's death. To the people around her, to the family, to the neighbors, to the congregation at the small Baptist church she attended every second and fourth Sunday, Tasha was one of those dependable, grounded adults that every family seems to have. She was Loretta's cousin, though most people just called her Aunt Tasha out of habit. The way families absorb people into roles that don't quite match the family tree, but feel right anyway. She had been a steady presence in Kelvin's life since he was around 11 or 12 years old. She showed up at birthdays. She helped with groceries when Loretta was stretched thin. She drove Kelvin to a few of his community college orientation events when Loretta's work schedule wouldn't allow it. Tasha lived alone in a 2-bedroom house, about a 10-minute drive from the Marsh family home. She had been engaged once, years earlier, but it had fallen apart. She never spoke about it directly, only in passing references that closed off before they could be followed. She had no children of her own. What she did have was a reputation for reliability, for showing up, for being the kind of person you could call at 9 at night when something went wrong and she would answer. In a family stretched thin by work and worry and absence, Tasha filled gaps. She was older, she was steady, she was trusted, completely and without question. No one ever questioned the closeness between them, not until it became something no one expected.
And that is what makes this story so difficult to sit with, because the danger didn't come from a stranger. It didn't come from outside. It came wrapped in familiarity, in access, in the quiet, accumulated weight of someone who had been allowed in, fully, trustingly allowed in, over many years. Investigators who later reviewed the timeline noted that Tasha's proximity to Kelvin wasn't unusual to anyone who knew the family, which is precisely why no one saw it coming, which is precisely why, by the time anyone understood what had been happening, it had already gone further than it ever should have.
People who knew Kelvin well started noticing the change somewhere around the summer, about 3 or 4 months before his death. It wasn't dramatic at first. It was the kind of shift you notice in hindsight, the kind that only makes sense once you know the whole story. His coworker Trey mentioned that Kelvin had started coming into work looking like he hadn't slept. Not once or twice, consistently, week after week. His eyes were heavy, and he had developed a habit of going still in the middle of conversations, just zoning out, staring at nothing, and then blinking back like he was surprised to find himself standing where he was. His sister Brianna noticed that he stopped coming to family dinners as often. When he did show up, he sat at the corner of the table and barely spoke. He used to tease her. It was their thing, their sibling rhythm. And that summer, he stopped. He just got quiet, Brianna later said. And I didn't know what quiet meant for him. I thought maybe he was stressed about school or money. I didn't think to ask deeper. Their mother, Loretta, noticed too, though she chalked it up to him being a young man figuring life out. She had too much on her own plate to press. She gave him space, the way she'd always respected his independence, not knowing that the space was not what he needed. Kelvin also started avoiding certain spaces. People close to him noted that he began finding excuses not to attend family gatherings where Tasha would be present. He started taking longer shifts at the auto parts store, sometimes volunteering for closings he normally would have passed on, as if he needed reasons to be somewhere else. Something had changed, and Kelvin wasn't talking about it. Not to his brother, not to Trey, not to anyone. Whatever was pressing down on him, he was carrying it alone, in the dark, the way he had probably been told to, or made to feel he had to. The first person Kelvin told was Trey. It was a Thursday evening in mid-September, and the two of them were sitting in Trey's driveway after work, not really doing anything, just talking the way they sometimes did after a long shift. And Kelvin, who had been quieter than usual for most of the day, said something that made Trey go completely still. He didn't say it clearly, not at first. He talked around it, the way people do when the thing they need to say is something they can't believe they're about to say. But Trey, to his credit, didn't rush him. He waited. And when Kelvin finally let it out, when he described what had been happening, who had been involved, how long it had been going on, Trey said later that the air between them changed, like something that couldn't be undone had just been spoken out loud. What Kelvin described was a relationship with Tasha that had crossed every line that should have been permanent. It had not started dramatically. That's the part that makes it so insidious. It had started with small things, conversations that went too long, closeness that crept past what was appropriate, a gradual erosion of boundaries that happened so slowly Kelvin hadn't recognized it for what it was until he was already deep inside it. He was 20, she was 34,
and a trusted family figure. The power in that room was never equal. And then came the moment that shattered everything, a secret that should never have existed. Tasha was pregnant, and Kelvin, sitting in that driveway in the dark, told Trey that he didn't know what to do, that he was terrified, that he felt like his life had already been decided for him without anyone asking.
If you've made it this far, comment "Stay strong" below, because this story only gets heavier from here. And I want you to know, the fact that you're still watching means something. These stories matter. Kelvin mattered. After that conversation with Trey, Kelvin's condition deteriorated rapidly. It was as if saying it out loud had made it more real, had collapsed whatever internal wall he'd been hiding behind. Trey urged him to tell his mother. He urged him to talk to someone, anyone. Kelvin said he couldn't, that Tasha had made it clear, in ways that didn't require threats, in ways that were softer and more suffocating than a direct threat, that this was something that stayed between them.
That the family would be destroyed, that people would blame him, that no one would understand. These are the tactics that show up again and again in documented cases of coercive control and abuse of trust. The slow installation of silence, the weaponization of shame, the creation of an internal prison that the victim builds around themselves because they have been carefully taught to. Kelvin stopped eating regularly. He lost weight that people noticed but didn't comment on. He called in sick to work twice in a single week, something he had never done before in over a year of employment. He started spending long hours alone in his room, and the journal entries found after his death, entries his mother could barely read through without breaking down, described a young man who felt cornered from every direction.
He wrote about feeling like a fraud, like he had done something wrong, even though somewhere underneath all the noise, he knew that wasn't true. He wrote about not wanting anyone to look at him, about how exhausted he was, not sleepy tired, but something deeper, something that went down into his bones. He felt trapped, like no matter what he did, his life was already collapsing, and he couldn't see a way forward that didn't destroy something. Ask yourself something right now. If Kelvin were someone you knew, your nephew, your little brother, your neighbor's kid, would you have seen it? Would you have pressed ask the quietness? Would you have asked a harder question? Most of us want to say yes. But the truth is, this kind of pain is designed to be invisible. It is hidden precisely because the people causing it understand the power of shame and silence. Kelvin wasn't weak. He was 20 years old and completely alone with something no one had prepared him to face. By early October, Kelvin had made a decision. He didn't announce it. He didn't leave a long note or say formal goodbyes. What he did was quieter than that, the kind of decision made by someone who has been running out of air for a long time and has finally resolved, in a tired and desperate way, to just get somewhere he could breathe. He called his older brother Darnell up in Atlanta. He asked if he could come stay for a while. Darnell said of course, without asking too many questions. He could hear something in his little brother's voice, a flatness, an exhaustion, but he didn't push it. He figured they would talk when Kelvin got there. On the night of October 14th, Kelvin packed a single duffel bag. He put in a change of clothes, his phone charger, the paperback novel he had been working through for 2 months, and a photograph of him and Brianna at her middle school graduation. He did not pack the journal. Investigators found it later, still under the mattress. He told his mother he was going to visit Darnell for a few days. Loretta hugged him at the door. She said she told him she loved him. She said he hugged her back but didn't say anything, just nodded and walked to the truck. The restored 2003 Chevy, the one he had spent a year fixing, idled for a moment in the driveway, and then he backed out and drove away. His desperation and confusion and mental exhaustion were all pushing at once. He was heading toward Darnell. He was heading toward something that might have looked like safety. He just needed to get there.
Kelvin never made it to Atlanta. At approximately 11:47 p.m., on a 2-lane highway about 40 miles north of Macon, his truck left the road. The vehicle struck a guardrail at high speed, went through it, and rolled into a shallow embankment. A passing driver spotted the wreckage shortly after midnight and called 911. Emergency responders arrived within 12 minutes. Kelvin was unresponsive when they reached him. He was transported to a regional medical center, where he was pronounced dead at 1:23 a.m. on October 15th. He was 20 years old. He never made it far, but he had been trying to get somewhere better. That matters. That has to matter.
His mother got the call at 1:50 in the morning. She said she sat down on the kitchen floor and didn't move for a long time. Brianna woke up to the sound of it, not the phone, but the silence after the phone. The specific, terrible quality of silence that tells you something has broken before anyone says a word. Darnell drove down from Atlanta through the night, arriving just before dawn, and the three of them sat together in the kitchen where Kelvin had eaten his grandmother's sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving, and they tried to hold each other through something that did not have any bottom to it.
In the days following Kelvin's death, as the family began the unbearable work of going through his things, his journal was found. Loretta brought it to Trey, because Trey had reached out immediately after Kelvin died, and Loretta, in her grief, sensed that Trey knew something. When Trey finally told her what Kelvin had confided that September night in the driveway, Loretta sat in her car outside her own house for 2 hours without going inside. The journal confirmed it. Entry by entry, in Kelvin's careful handwriting that Loretta said looked like him, sounded like him, was the whole story. The timeline, the confusion, the shame, the walls closing in. Loretta brought the journal to the authorities. Tasha was contacted.
What followed was the kind of legal and emotional unraveling that nobody in that family had ever been equipped for. Tasha, it was confirmed, was pregnant. The investigation that followed was difficult, complex in the way that cases involving family members always are, complex in the way that cases involving abuse of trust tend to be, because the crime doesn't always look like a crime from the outside. But investigators and the family knew what they were looking at. And just when the family thought the tragedy was over, the truth made it even harder to accept. Because they had to grieve Kelvin and reckon with what had been done to him at the same time. They had to hold both things, the love and the rage, and they did not always know what to do with either one. Think about that for a moment. Imagine being Brianna, 15 years old, watching your family tear open a wound that was already fatal. Imagine being Loretta, replaying every moment she had trusted, every time she had been grateful for the help, every time she had said, "Thank you, Tasha," and feeling that gratitude curdle into something she didn't have a clean word for. What would you do with that? How would you carry it? How do you grieve someone and simultaneously have to fight for their truth to be recognized? There are things this story asks us to confront. The first is the way abuse hides inside of trust. Kelvin was not failed by strangers. He was failed by proximity and access, and the assumption that familiarity equals safety. The people who study coercive control and abusive trust consistently note that the closer the relationship, the harder it is to see clearly, and the harder it is for victims to speak up.
Kelvin did not speak up for months, and when he finally did, he was so overwhelmed by everything that had accumulated around him that even getting out felt impossible. He made it to the driveway. He made it 40 miles up the road, but he was carrying too much, for too long, alone. The second thing this story asks us to confront is the silence inside families. Not willful silence, not cruel silence, but the ordinary silence that comes from not asking the harder questions, from giving space when space wasn't what was needed, from trusting without verifying. Every person in Kelvin's life loved him. Not one of them failed him on purpose. And yet he was alone with this. That should haunt us a little. It should make us more willing to say, "I see something is wrong. What's really going on?" Not once, but twice, but as many times as it takes to get a real answer.
Some stories aren't just tragic, they are warnings. Kelvin's story is a warning about what happens when we treat our discomfort with a topic as more important than the safety of the person sitting across from us. If you know someone, a young person, anyone, who has gone quiet in that particular way, who is starting shrinking, who is avoiding spaces they used to love, who seems like they are carrying something they can't put down. Ask them. Ask them clearly, kindly, and without judgment. Ask them more than once. You may not get the answer the first time, but the fact that you asked, that you saw them and reached for them, may be the thing that changes everything. What do you think about Kelvin's story? Do you think things could have turned out differently if he had felt safe enough to speak out earlier? What would you have done if you were Trey that night in the driveway, or Loretta getting that phone call at 2 in the morning? I want to hear from you. Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Drop the word awareness in the comments if you believe that silence protects abusers. Let's fill the comment section. And before you go, if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We cover stories that matters, stories that don't always make the front page, but live in the lives of real people every single day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming. See you in the next one.